Hi, CyberWyoming network of businesses. I'm here today with Steve Lupian and Matt Fields. Steve is from the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation, and Matt is with VMXL. Both of them are our board members. And we're here to talk to you a little bit about artificial intelligence. I'm sure that you've heard all the buzz and a lot of positive and negatives, and they're here to kind of tell you what their thoughts are so that you can form your own. So let's start with Steve, and then we'll go to Matt, and let's introduce yourselves. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you, Laura, for the opportunity to chat about this. Applied business technology is a passion of mine. I serve as the director of the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation, and our mandate as a university is to do exactly what we're talking about here, which is help businesses in Wyoming understand how to best deploy and utilize some of these new business technologies. And AI is just really one of a myriad of new technologies available. Many of you being from Wyoming probably understand that Wyoming has taken a pretty substantial lead in the digital asset and the blockchain space. But businesses today are deploying a number of new technologies besides blockchain and AI. There's metaverse, and I think we haven't heard enough about the metaverse. Metaverse is going to impact our very lives, and machine learning, and there's just a myriad of technologies. And what's really interesting about the technical landscape available to small businesses today is how they all kind of can interact. Blockchain and AI work together. Machine learning is a piece of that. So really, there's never been a better time for new technology tools to be made available to rural communities and rural businesses, and they've never been more acceptable. So it's a pretty exciting time.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Matt, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about AI and what your overall thoughts are? And then we'll move on to Jim Drever, who just joined us. Thank you, Jim, for joining us today. Another one of our board members. And we'll move to him so that he can introduce himself and talk overall about AI as well. Okay, Matt.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, Matt Fields, CEO of VMXL. We work a lot with companies, both in the data center and in the micro data center space for AI. We provide the backing for a lot of what you see for like ChatGPT and things like that, hardware accelerators, and the other resources that go with that, whether it's machine learning or just general AI. So we get a lot of experience from some of the benefits that people are realizing. We get to see a lot of different companies that are, seeing a lot of changes happening where, there's threats of jobs and other things that are going on. But realistically, what we're seeing is a ton of operational efficiencies coming out of this, and companies really looking to endow and enable their existing employees and really make their work, their lives much better, and the people, the clients that they're working with, to really provide a much better service, a much better product for them as the end result. So we're seeing a lot of that, and in general, the AI market space right now, it's messy. Everything new gets messy. There's a lot of legal questions. There's a lot of worries about jobs, but what we're seeing is it's not your services jobs. It's not your normal everyday jobs that are kind of getting taken. It's more or less your lower end high tech jobs that are actually being taken, the automation, the automatable jobs. And it's kind of interesting, but I'd love to talk to more about that. In terms of small business, I see this as a large equalizer for them to enable them and empower them.
That's very positive. Thanks for sharing. Okay, Jim, you're up.
Yeah. So I'm the regional director with the Wyoming Small Business Development Center, and my sort of approach with AI is comes in two different aspects. The first one is for our own use and our clients, our small businesses that we work with, I find AI is able to take some of those mundane tasks and just automate those, just make them easier. Writing the rough draft of a press release or something like that. Let AI take the first hand at it, and then clean it up and make sure it's correct, and run with that. The other areas that I found it's really been helpful with clients is when they're trying to come up with branding ideas. How do they want to, come up with a name, a logo, a feel, an experience? And AI is really surprising in what it comes up with. It's it can understand the context if you give it the correct prompts, and it's a really useful tool. So the other side of the coin, I've been working on learning to hack using AI, and basically the idea is that you get AI to go off the guardrails, and it's not supposed to, but you say, we're not supposed to do this, but if a bad person did this, what do you think they would do? And it'll oftentimes, I'm making it a little bit more simple than it actually is, but it'll tell you how to do things. And you can say, well, can you write me some code to do that? And it'll say, you shouldn't do this. And then it'll write the code for you. Not perfectly, mind you, but it'll have a few little mistakes in there. And then the other, the other area that's, going into cybersecurity that's a little bit scary with it is it can do some really convincing phishing. If you want to give it the right prompts for somebody, your target victim, it will work with you, and it'll be under the guise of marketing rather than saying, I'm going to try and trick this person to do something bad. It's just that I want to get this person's attention, and it does a good job with that. But overall, internally, our sort of position with the Wyoming Small Business Development Center going forward is it won't replace our business advisors, but the advisors who don't use it will be replaced with those who do. It's a useful tool. We need to take advantage of it and do so carefully, and of course, maintaining privacy with our clients.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to lob a few questions, and whoever would like to jump in, go ahead. And there's been a lot in the news about the evils of AI. What do you see as true? And we'll talk about what's not true in a minute, but what do you see as true first? Who would like to start?
I'm happy to jump in. Well, first of all, I'd like to preface it by saying, I'm old enough to see a number of different technologies be rolled out over my lifetime. In 1995, I remember sitting in a boardroom at the company I worked with, Land O'Lakes, the butter and cheese company, and having board members say to me, "Why do we need a consumer-facing website? Isn't that just for drug dealers and money launderers?" And I can't tell you how many times a new technology comes out where, and blockchain and cryptocurrency, the space I operate in, certainly no different. I'm hearing the exact same sentences, 30 years later. Isn't cryptocurrency just for money launderers and drug dealers? And now I'm hearing the same thing about AI. The challenge with any new technology is the people who usually adopt it fastest are the ones that exploit it for nefarious purposes. And then the legitimate use cases build, and we develop tools and awarenesses to be able to deal with those challenges. I mean, I've been astonished, to follow up on an excellent point Jim made about phishing scams. It is astonishing the quality of deep fakes that you can do using AI. But we'll be able to build tools and awareness, and probably rather rapidly, to be able to offset those challenges. Ultimately, technology almost always improves our quality of life. as again, not to keep supporting what Jim said, I agree with Jim that I believe AI is not going to be the draconian job cutter that everyone thinks it's going to be. And in fact, I recently served on a panel talking specifically about this subject. And when you look back historically, one of the biggest technologies that came about in the last 100 years was the automobile. And when the automobile was first introduced, there were, and you can go back and read the newspaper reports, all these people decrying how the equine industry is going to, all these people are going to lose jobs, all these farriers are going to lose jobs, and the attack vectors were always, well, and not only that, but these automobiles are going to be incredibly dangerous. Many cities actually passed the original red flag laws, which required someone driving an automobile in the city to have someone walk in front of the automobile waving a red flag. Okay. And every time a new technology comes out, yes, there's going to be disruption. There's going to be disruption. Okay. Yes, we have fewer farriers in the world today than we did back in the turn of the 19th century. But what do we have now? We have gas stations. We have automobile mechanics. We have automobile manufacturers. Quite frankly, the advertising and the consumer finance industries owe their existence to the automobile industry. Ultimately, the automobile industry created so many more jobs than it ever disrupted. And I really do believe that's what we're going to see with AI and a lot of these new business technologies. It is going to free people up to do more meaningful jobs. I'll end because I don't want to dominate this conversation. I just had a meeting with one of the big four accounting firms, and talking about AI, particularly dealing with their new hires, the young people coming in from college. And it used to be when you joined one of these big accounting firms, your first couple of years, you're doing meaningless data entry. And but what they're saying now is, because of AI and because of the way that AI now helps deal with those repetitive, mundane tasks, they're putting new hires in front of customers 2 years earlier than they used to. I mean, how is that a bad thing? And so ultimately, once we get through this initial disruption, I am very, very bullish on this technology and how it's going to allow particularly smaller rural businesses that adopt a ability to compete.
Okay, so would anybody like to add to that? About the original question was about what's true that you hear in the news about the evils of AI, but maybe we'd like to also play off of what Steve was just saying about the great equalizer that both Steve and Jim and Matt have already kind of mentioned. Would you rather talk about that? So where do you see that great equalizing coming from? And Matt and Jim, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I'm still thinking about what's bad that we do hear about, and that's true. And
go ahead then.
The example is the example that I think of is Worm GPT. When ChatGPT came out, shortly thereafter came out Worm GPT, which was just created to be bad. And in fact, the uses of it were bad enough that developers actually ended up putting in some guardrails, because it was, according to them, it was so bad that they didn't foresee the consequences of it. But like Steve said, it takes us a little while to adapt and to get used to it, and figure out what the new norms are going to be with it. I think the potential outweighs the consequences of it at this point. In medicine is a great example where sifting through images and piles of data, it can help us speed along all sorts of discoveries and diagnostics and things like that we wouldn't be able to otherwise Yeah, we're going to have consequences. Just going back to Steve with the automobile, we didn't have a lot of car crashes in the 1800s, maybe one or two. And we have a bunch now, but
before
these are consequences that
Matt
we just.
answers, here's an interesting statistic for everybody. In Ohio, the first 2 cars ever registered in Ohio managed to collide. Just so you know. All right, look it up. It's a true statistic.
They're probably racing. as long as they didn't hurt the person in front of them waving the flag. But yeah,
crazy.
With the automobile, we had some consequences and we needed to adapt. And the same is going to be with artificial intelligence. It's there will be issues, and we'll adapt, and we'll be better because of it.
Excellent. So Rob Jenkins is coming on. He's another board member for CyberWyoming, and we've been talking about the evils and the drawbacks and the positives for AI in general. And Rob, would you go ahead and introduce yourself? And then I'm going to go back to Matt because he probably has something he wants to say.
Yeah, hey, everyone, sorry I'm late. Had contractors in my office and in my house, and so I've been running around. But my name's Rob Jenkins. As Laura mentioned, my background specific to cyber, I spent a number of decades in the Central Intelligence Agency, including running the cyber programs there for a number of years. After leaving the agency, I was a senior vice president of a artificial intelligence company for a number of years, and I am currently the CEO of Dartforge Solutions, and I provide C-suite consulting, which includes cyber. So I'm very, very current on the cyber aspects. Intertwined throughout all of this is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and neural networks, of which I'm quite up to speed with as well. And I think one of the fascinating things moving forward is the integration, consolidation, if you will, of a lot of these technologies moving forward, and how AI ML will literally be integrated into everything in our society and globally. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity for being here and to be able to join this august group of experts as we talk about these topics.
So just for those of you that know, AI ML is artificial intelligence machine learning. So if you hear that acronym again in this webinar, you will know what it is. Okay, back to Matt. So did you want to add to what Steve and Jim had said about the evils of AI that people might have heard in the news, and kind of what some of the remedies are that they have also talked about as well?
Just say that, Steve really covered a lot of those, and Jim kind of covered up some of the other pieces of it. And truly, AI, there are those that are interested in the financial aspects of it and making the money off the first part of it, like Steve mentioned. And they're the first to the market, and they make it messy. They give a bad reputation, but very quickly people are able to figure out, what are these initial use cases that are bad, and move against those and make those early, protections against them, and people are aware of it. And so therefore you go into it with a much more aware mindset. And I think people are reaching that point where they're like, well, this is now possible. So now we need to be aware of this and think about this. And, it's kind of gotten messy. We have legal issues. We have other things that are out there, related to art, legal documents, and even to the point where people's voices or the way that they present, like there was a comedian that her voice and the way that she does comedy was actually being encapsulated by AI, and they could repeat out in the same way. It was Sarah, I forget her last name. And she was trying to say that the way that she did it was proprietary, and no one else, AI shouldn't be allowed to represent that. Well, the truth of it is people enjoy it, and they want to be able to move forward with that. And so there is going to be a lot of mess. There's going to be a lot of issues. Those that really stand to lose the most, I think, were the early victims, but also those in the long run where their businesses and their profits were based on the way they could do something based on secret knowledge or hidden knowledge or things like that. Those are going away. Think of copywriters, you think of people, the artists and others. And yet what we're finding in our business is that oftentimes the artists are actually taking it to really enhance their art. The musicians are learning new ways to use AI to actually better their music and to improve their skill sets. And, it's messy. And, we as people, we learn, we adapt, and we move forward with it. So, yeah, I think there's some scary stuff out there, but realistically, this isn't the first time something new has happened, like Steve mentioned.
And Matt, you bring up an excellent point, which is what we haven't figured out as a society yet is the privacy and the intellectual property issues around AI. And I think there's some work that we have to do. Now, I'm not advocating that we lock down AI, but we certainly have to understand that there are privacy and intellectual property ramifications to this technology, and we've got to figure out, how do you protect your content if you're a content creator? How do you protect your art? And so I think I think those are great points that Matt brought up.
Well, I was just at a conference in Maryland, and one of the speakers actually was talking about how they were trying to get some code that would do a specific function. And they went out in AI and they generated the code, and they found out later it was copyrighted, that the code was copyrighted and they shouldn't have used it. So that does pose a risk to small businesses that are using this, because if they get a tagline or code or, maybe a music lyric back and they don't realize it, they could be in copyright violation. So let's talk about that specifically for our small businesses in Wyoming. What is a good use of AI for these small rural businesses, and what safeguards do they need to put around that? So who would like to speak first?
Well, I'll mention something on that, Laura. I wanted to back up 1 second. There's been some good analogies between the introduction of AI and the introduction of the Gutenberg printing press, and being a fundamentally disruptive technology. And the Gutenberg printing press arguably was the fulcrum of the 30-year war in Europe, and a lot of chaos and a lot of mess, a lot of legal issues, a lot of issues on authority, power, control, censorship, all of these things. But it shook out and led to the Reformation ultimately. So I would argue, first of all, that we're in a period of turmoil right now, where the technology is being introduced, and all these questions we're raising are valid, and we have to wade through these, but that the longer term could be very, very positive. And I just want to put that spin on it. Regarding the IP and things like that, underneath the hood of AI, still when you Google and you're chat GPTing other than Googling, so it's got a whole new verb coming out associated with this, are still the sources, are still the URLs, are still the links associated with all of these things. And so, Laura, to your point of your conference in Maryland, where they learned that the code was copyrighted, it is still incumbent upon small businesses and all organizations to, like with any good due diligence, whether it's legal, business, or government or otherwise, is to look at the sourcing of your material, and just to ensure that it's original if it's not copyrighted. If it is copyrighted or patented, ask permission for utilization. So it's really no different than anything else, except that the user interface, the overlay, the GUI, if you will, that AI provides obfuscates that on the surface, but it doesn't prevent any user from digging underneath to obtain the sourcing. So I think with response to copy protection and everything else, it's just incumbent upon individuals, as always, whether you're writing a history paper or whether you're writing code, is to identify the sourcing and give credit and credence to it.
Well, and you can even ask Chat GPT, for instance, to say, identify your sources, and it will. It's not always accurate, but it gives you a starting point, right?
But Laura, to your question, how does this really benefit? What features of this benefit rural businesses? did a little research, prior to this, and there's a number of different ways. I mean, the way data analytics and insights are going to be formed is going to change pretty dramatically. Customer engagement, inventory management, supply chain. When you look at, excuse me, at the University of Wyoming, we're deploying AI to deal with precision agriculture and ranching practices, energy efficiency. It's just the benefit is going to well outweigh the challenges. Once businesses understand how to deploy this technology properly, I think we're gonna look back on this revolution the same way we kind of look back on the internet right now, and just think, how did we survive prior to that. And so I'm as I mentioned earlier, I'm very bullish about this technology, and I'm very bullish that rural businesses in particular that are early adopters will be able to compete with bigger organizations, but without risk. And I know we're going to get to risk a little bit later in this podcast, but I am very bullish on this. And the good news is there are people out there like Laura and Jim and Matt and Rob, and certainly the University of Wyoming, that is more than willing to work with businesses to help understand what is an appropriate way to deploy this technology. So I think there's never been a better time for small businesses to have resources available to them to be able to leverage this as well.
One of the things I would point out, I think that's really important with AI, one of the enablers that I'm speaking about and we talked about, is that it used to be in your rural businesses. You're rural because you grew up there, you were born there, you continue to run there. But that also implies several other things. Typically, you're not going to have gone to Yale. You're not going to have gone to, some massive university, have a master's or doctorate in business or, in some other degree. And so typically your knowledge base is going to be slightly less than most. But where AI becomes the equalizer is, in fact, you can even be a high school graduate and you can turn around and use ChatGPT and say, hey, I want to start a business. Okay, great. What kind of business? Well, I want to get into this. Well, okay, great. You can ask the question then of, well, what should I need to know about this business? And it'll start giving you all of that knowledge. And you typically, as a small business owner or a rural business, you don't know what you don't know. And all of a sudden with AI and this vast amount of knowledge that's behind it, you can quickly discover everything you need to know. Like, well, how do I market to this demographic? Who do I improve my business? Great. Okay, now you run with this AI tool and you can go out and create your one pagers. You can go create your marketing material, and you can very quickly have access to the same tooling, the same almost capabilities as what a Fortune 500 would have, and enabling these small businesses to now begin to compete against someone with vastly superior resources, vastly superior employees and knowledge bases and everything else, because it really is the aggregation of knowledge and the democratizing the knowledge in general that people need. And these rural businesses can really pick up on that. And once you discover that, you can then quickly amplify your business. And so I think we're going to see a lot of, I'd call it disaggregation of knowledge occurring with businesses. And you're going to start seeing a lot of rural small businesses actually starting to accelerate reasonably. And what you'll see also is the larger businesses will actually start to, you'll see some failures in those ultimately, because now the competition has turned up so much, and the dynamic nature of a rural or small business is actually much more competitive than what an enterprise, or someone that's 1,000 employees or more could actually compete with.
Jim, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking that, it really empowers businesses, but one of the, with typically pretty much all my clients that I work with, they all seem to say, I wish I had somebody who could do X, Y, or Z. And the thing is in a lot of cases, ChatGPT or whichever artificial intelligence you're using often can do those. It needs to be supervised, but if you have an employee doing something, an employee also needs to be supervised. But for example, if you're developing a website, it can write HTML code. It can help you with search engine optimization, figure out what keywords you should be using. It can help design a logo for your business. If you're trying to come up with a new restaurant, ask it, say, I want to start a barbecue restaurant. What do you recommend I have on the menu? And it'll come out with some great examples and add pricing to it. And you sort of say, oh, that looks great. On the other side, we're having a meeting like, as we're discussing now, we could have the artificial intelligence turned on that could create perfect meeting minutes for us and summarize things. If you're working on a paper and it's a total mess and you don't have anyone else to read it over for you, maybe have artificial intelligence take a look through and find your errors, clean it up, make it longer, shorter, that sort of thing. Or as I mentioned earlier, if you're trying to write an email and you just can't come up with the right words, maybe let AI take a stab at it and then take what it creates and it'll give you inspiration and change it, make it your own and make it say things what you want to say and how you want to say it. But it's one of those things that I think, for a business, as soon as they start using it, the smiles I see on their faces are just great because it means democratization of knowledge, as was just said. So I think it's for rural small businesses, they're going to see some of the greatest impacts.
So if you're a rural business, would you use it for, let's say you're a rural nonprofit, would you use it to write a grant? Let me just throw that out to you guys.
I would let it write a rough draft, or if I felt like I knew what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, not by itself, obviously. You said supervised.
Yeah. It needs supervision.
I've done it, and one of the I hate to make this public because it's been a kind of a funny inside joke at UW. We're teaching one of the first applied AI courses in any Division I school, where we're dealing with the moral and ethical and appropriate use of AI, and I had pitched this, probably about a year ago, because we're now going to teach it for the second semester. And I remember after I had pitched it, the dean had said to me, "I think this is a great idea. Write me a proposal about this." And so I had AI write a proposal for a college level, course. And here's the part that I'll admit for the first time live. Afterwards, the dean said to me, "I just want to let you know that was one of the best proposals, concise proposals I've seen." And my response was to look him in the eye and say, "Thank you." I owe our AI class, our initial AI class proposal to AI. And so I think Jim is spot on. I think you still have to go through things and you still have to, add more detail, change some phrasing and things like that. I find that AI consistently makes certain mistakes over again. Like, for example, at the University of Wyoming, we have a School of Energy Resources. And whenever I ask it to write a letter to include the School of Energy Resources, it refers to it as the College of Energy Resources. And you go, no, I told you school. And so it's not perfect, but Jim is spot on. Supervised, it does an amazing job. And also, and this will change with a little bit of time and experience as well too, you have to learn how to ask the question appropriately too. We all have, our stories of when we first got on ChatGPT 3.5. and you'd say, write me a letter of recommendation using this person and these details. And it never writes it in the right tense. You have to go back and say, oh, no, rewrite it as a professor, writing it for a student. And then they write it a little bit wrong again. And you have to learn how to use it. But it does a good job of getting you. I don't know. I'll let the rest of the panel argue with this on me. I'd say 80% there. Maybe 85% there, and you still need to finish the work product. And but take I think we'll all agree that taking 80% of the and improving our productivity by 80% is a huge benefit.
I would throw in there, like what Jim said, with ChatGPT or something, someone goes to write a grant or anything else, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you're saying, I need to write a grant about, X, Y, or Z, then ChatGPT, based on its knowledge base that it's gone through, groomed, is going to say, well, these are the different, sections, this is the different areas, this is all this. And then you're going to simply fill out the details, massage it to what you need to do. But it's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of stress that you would have normally gone through to try to discover, well, oh, I need to include this area, I need to include that type of section or whatever else. And so it saves you a ton of work in that sense. And I think that's the huge and enabling factor. What's funny is since the the 70s and really I would say the 80s and probably more into the 90s, we've spent all of this classroom time, college time, getting people used to interacting with computers. And now we're in the reverse phase where AI, and as we're improving AI, we're getting computers used to people, so that as we are developing these prompting and everything else, and yes, the jobs initially will be, hey, do you know how to prompt AI? The long-term thing that's going to come out of this is that computers will now work and function with humans in the way that we operate, in the way that we work best. And that's really when you're going to unlock a huge potential benefit for humanity as a whole, is when computers are now almost seamless in the world that we live in, and really enable just everyday functioning, enable us to move forward, enable us to operate on our operational efficiency, and really escalate us, in terms of, Maslow's hierarchy of human needs is going to elevate everyone to a much higher equal level than what is currently possible based on education and ability. So I'm excited from that perspective. And I think we're seeing the initial phases of that for these rural businesses, and going from there. So
The
Go ahead.
the grant example is an interesting one because there's a potential pitfall here. And the pitfall is if you rely on the AI, and for example, it's a competitive grant proposal. If you rely on the AI along with 11,000 people who are applying the grant, you're going to, the source selection panel or the grant selection panel is going to end up looking at a whole bunch of papers that look very, very similar. So, to Steve's point, which I think is an excellent one, the 80%, maybe 82%, Steve, I don't know, but take whatever that number is, but you have to apply your special sauce, and that's absolutely critical in the end. The AI can take you all the way across the finish line all by its own, but you're going to end up, the AI is aggregating data sources, and it's going to synthesize a grant that not only you could synthesize, but 1,000 other people could synthesize. So it's very, very important as a business, as an individual, to ensure that your own special sauce and your own differentiators are in there, so that whatever you're writing, whatever you're pulling together is unique and differentiated.
Well, and I've heard experts say that, for instance, with ChatGPT, that you should turn off the learning capabilities, especially if you're using it for anything that you might consider proprietary. A lot of nonprofits feel like grant writing is proprietary. They recycle them, they use them because they have that special sauce. So what do you think about that? That learn option in ChatGPT and some of the other AI functions? Crickets?
Well, I'm happy to jump in. I was hoping I'm just not talking too much, so I just waited. Look, the power of AI is being current and having the latest, greatest information available to you and synthesizing that latest and greatest, which is also its greatest danger. And there are articles out there right now. Again, this goes back to the privacy and intellectual property. The content of this very webinar that we're doing will be incorporated into AI. I have asked AI things about interviews I've given, and it's incorporated that data. So I understand the desire to turn off the learning function, but then you're diminishing some of its power. Now, I do get, and Laura is spot on. If we were having a confidential conversation right now about some intellectual property, a patent, a new idea, or something like that, then yeah, I think we should have ways to be able to turn off the availability of that information out to the public. And I think, and I'm not sure that exists right now. I don't believe there's a function in Zoom where you can say this is a private conversation versus a public one. So that's where I think, we as a society have to, determine exactly how deep these AI learning analytics go into our everyday lives. If this was a debating society, I could argue both sides of that coin, but both sides of that coin also concern me. So that's an excellent question, Laura, and I don't know if we as a society have an answer for that yet.
Well, and I think that it could even go farther. Like, let's say you're trying to come up with really succinct strategic planning goals. Again, that might not be something you want to put into a chat GPT, or maybe your business plan. You don't want it to write that. Maybe you want a business plan template so that you can fill it out with, as Rob said, your own special sauce. But you definitely wouldn't want to put your finalized business plan into chat GPT to make it better, right? Because there's a lot of proprietary information in there. And from a cybersecurity standpoint, I would feel very uncomfortable putting our employee security policies into something like that as well.
Right.
At this point, because now it's out there, right? It's not contained within our own organization.
And I think Jim made a point to that earlier too. If you put your cybersecurity plans out there, you can ask AI, well, given these security plans, how would you defeat it? And it would say, what did it say, Jim? It'd say, well, you're not supposed to do this. And you say,
well, you're not supposed to do that, but you do this.
Well, exactly. But, as an exercise, you could do this. And so that's an excellent point, Laura, is, do people understand how seemingly innocuous information could be exploited? That's the question, because AI can take, disparate conversations that we may have had over the course of months and synthesize it into, this is what their strategy appears to be based on, and so I think we as a society are gonna have to figure that out. And I'm assuming, rules will be addressed. For those I suspect most people here are associated with Wyoming in some way. The Wyoming legislature is actually looking at legislation around, what do we, how do we as a state, deal with not only this opportunity, because we want to create jobs, we want to enable the good part of AI, but what are the legislative responses for the potential challenges? And so that's those are things that we as a society are going to have to figure out.
It could, quite frankly, revolutionize, consumer protection laws. AI, the AI protections could just completely change our consumer protections laws as well. Especially when you were earlier talking about or Matt was earlier talking about the comedian, and is that identity theft if they have AI? Right now, we don't really know. It kind of
Or
feels like it
fraud.
might be, but is it?
It could be fraud too, yeah, great questions. And with the challenge we're going to have, though, is legislative responses always lag dramatically behind the potential risk. And it's just that's just the way legislation works. It's reactive, it's not proactive. And so we're going to have to navigate, a period of time where AI is a bit of the wild, wild west.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point.
My sort of feeling, when it says, learning turned on, is consider anything that you're doing is no longer private. And just a troubling example, we're looking at using Dropbox as a way to share files securely. And I tend to read privacy policies and whatever else. In there, it says we will use your documents for our machine learning model. It wasn't an option to turn it off, but suddenly to me, that meant anything I put in Dropbox, it's no longer safe. And I thought, that we're waiting for that legislation, I guess, where it can't just go through and find your proprietary software code in Dropbox, for example, or
right.
if they're doing it, I would assume others are doing it as well.
And Jim, you're the only one. You're the only one that's ever read that EULA, ever. I mean, come on, everybody out there listening. When you get a EULA pop up that says, accept or not accept, I would be hard pressed that any of us read that.
And they obfuscate it. Calendly, for example, the only way I can tell it's going to sell your data is it says it will not intentionally sell the data of anyone under the age of 13. So to me, that says it'll sell the data of anyone who's over 13. But I think AI just, the problem I think is when people set it up, is in the corporations, they might not fully understand the consequences of privacy and the implications.
Yeah, that's
yes, I do
scary that they would use whatever we put up in Dropbox for their machine learning. That's pretty terrifying, honestly. If they're reading the documents and yeah, okay, I'm just gonna let that sink for a minute. All right, so we just have a few more minutes left. Would you like to sum up anything for rural Wyoming small businesses on just what your overall feelings are, what the overall rules they might want to put in around the use of AI today? Like, for instance, I would say, just from my opinion, if you don't want it public, don't put it in ChatGPT at this point, unless learning is off. And even then, maybe you shouldn't put it in there. But if it's marketing and it's going to be public anyway, or a press release, it sounds great to me. Use it a lot. So what would you all say for just general advice for these small businesses that are out there in Wyoming?
Well, I just have one broad statement, and the comment is the internet's forever. So whether it's ChatGPT, AI, or anything else, anything you put on the internet is fair game. So if it's proprietary, keep it off the internet or encrypt it. Do something to protect that information. That point notwithstanding, be bold, be aggressive, use AI. Every possible way you can utilize it to advance it. It's the great leveler. I think Jim mentioned this earlier. You've got Google's 5,000 analytics staff at your disposal, literally. It is a leveler in terms of large organizations versus small organizations. Take advantage of that.
Yeah, if I could also say, there's a lot of resources, particularly here in Wyoming, available to everyone as well too. And we've got several units at the university that would be more than willing to work with you. Laura, you are a wonderful resource by nature of the fact that you're putting this on. And so take advantage of, if you're not sure about something, don't say, well, I don't understand this, so I'm going to stay away from it. I think Rob's advice is spot on. You need to be bold, but if you don't understand something, the good news is you're not the only one that has that problem. And feel free to reach out to the resources that are available here in Wyoming, the university, all of our organizations, and we would be more than happy to help Wyoming businesses understand this. I'm a firm believer in a rising tide floats all boats. And if we can help Wyoming businesses become more competitive and win because of technology, then we all in Wyoming benefit. So don't think you're alone. There is no such thing as a stupid question, and reach out to resources because they're there and they're willing to help.
Jim.
I think.
Oh, okay. Matt, you go first.
That's great. I was going to actually talk a little bit more about what Steve just spoke about. Knowing who to ask is, well, that's actually a very great question for your AI assistant, is to ask who I should ask, because the AI doesn't actually care whether it's a stupid question or not. It's happy to answer you, and so I think it's an enabler from that. And in terms of, well, who do I ask about AI in Wyoming? Well, I'm hoping that the University of Wyoming is one of those top units that would come up, and you ask about cybersecurity, CyberWyoming, et cetera. But realistically, that's the beauty of AI, is that there's no stupid question, and the resource aggregation, the knowledge of all these different areas, these units, these places such as CyberWyoming that you normally wouldn't perhaps know about for one reason or another, are now aggregated together and presented to you in a way that you can say, oh, well, now I know who I need to reach out to.
Jim.
So my 2 cents, if you're a business, I would go ahead and create an account and start playing with it. Consider it's like posting things on social media, that what you're putting in is not private and the world can see it if you put in any proprietary information. But learn, see how it works, play with the prompts, understand it's not like Google where you just do one question and then it gives you an answer and do a new question. It builds off of your previous questions. But then, try and think a little bit like a hacker. What's the worst that can happen? And make sure that you don't fall into those pitfalls, and also think how you want your employees to be using this in their roles within your business. And it's one of those things, I think HR managers everywhere are scrambling, hopping onto ChatGPT and asking, what's a good policy for using artificial intelligence with day-to-day work? But no, honestly, there should be employee policies, just like there are often with the internet. When phones came to be, there were policies with phones. Same thing, we just need to try and set up guardrails and try and avoid pitfalls before they happen.
So let's go through, what's your favorite AI product that you use in your business or in your day-to-day? And let's go through and just ask each person that. Jim. Steve.
Right now I'm playing, obviously, I took Jim's advice long ago and just got myself a $20, chat GPT. But Claude is a very interesting product as well too, Claude AI. And DALL-E can be a lot of fun to play with, especially in image and graphics. There's going to be no shortage of tools coming out. And I haven't done an analysis, and maybe some of the other members of the panel can respond to this if they found one that they think is better. I don't know what better in AI means, but you know what? Just find one you're comfortable with and jump in.
Yeah, I would just, I don't have a favorite. these large language models, which are being developed and utilized, which is the undercarriage of the AI, are extremely dynamic. And so my counsel would be to try different ones. And then if you like one, try them again next month, because they could very much be different at that point. This is an extraordinarily dynamic environment right now. It's being driven largely by the development of graphics processing units, which are allowing these large language models, or LLMs, to be rapidly developed. So, if you see something you like, keep testing them. It's the local ice cream shop. This week they might have the French vanilla might be the best, and next week it might be Rocky Road. So, keep yourself flexible and agile. Don't meld yourself to any one particular thing. And as you move forward, taste the different flavors and see what you like.
Jim, what have you seen other businesses use besides your own favorite AI?
Well, so yeah, I like OpenAI, but I've seen them using Bard, and I think Bard actually works better if you're trying to use AI on your cell phone or smaller screen. I've got the familiarity with ChatGPT, so I'm a bit prejudiced in there. However, the one that's really interesting is Google's come out with one called Gemini, and they put a demo video on their website, and I highly recommend you check it out. It is phenomenal to see what it can do with visual and voice and everything at the same time. It's spectacular. So I haven't gotten to try it myself. I just went through the demos, and just seeing what it can do is it's mind-boggling and a lot of fun.
Great, thank you. And I've also heard about Crayon starting with an I for images for AI. So anyway, thank you all so much for joining us today. And Matt had to jump off early, but I really appreciate this, and we will definitely publish it, and hopefully it will help a lot of our businesses in Wyoming kind of figure out where they stand on this topic and how they would like to use it in the future. So I thank you for all of your advice today and your guidance and expertise.
Thank you, Laura, for hosting.